It's my pleasure to introduce Vicky Austin, PhD candidate at Western Sydney University at the Hawkesbury Institute for the Environment. Vicky has been a long time friend of mine now in the world of lyrebirds particularly, but her science story goes back to about 2013 when she started her honours. She did an honours project with Deakin, and that honours project was on birds at night, sleeping water birds in particular. So that was done down at Geelong, Deakin in Geelong. Vicky then went on to, I believe you published that work, didn't you? Yes, that was published. Then went off to Paraguay, if you will, and studied burrowing owls and behavioural ecology in burrowing owls, and published that work as well. So she was doing all right. Then in 2015, went on to do a master's at Macquarie Uni, if I've got this right, on the song and duetting in chirruping wedgebills, which are a charming little bird somewhere in the central parts of the country. So they're quite a Fowler's Gap. There you go. So that work was also written up. So Vicky's actually, in a very short amount of time, contributed a lot to the scientific literature. But then, of course, she got onto her real work, which was in 2015 and naturally was on lyrebirds, and got into this PhD on female vocalisations in lyrebirds at Western Sydney. Vicky's been the recipient of a whole range of different awards and scholarships. Most prestigious was the Fulbright Scholarship, which actually sent Vicky over to Cornell University and studied with some of the best in the world, leading the field in song and evolutionary biology. But she's also received awards from or funding from BirdLife, Wetton Hall Environment Fund, and Holsworth as well, the Holsworth Research Endowment. So she's really been done a fantastic job. And when you sort of look at her CV, it's quite fantastic to just see how much Vicky's done. And she also won the 3-minute thesis at HIE, which
Pride and joy moment.
Yeah, so a very accomplished person, and it's just been a pleasure working with Vicky in Sherbrooke to study the lyrebirds, and I've certainly learned a hell of a lot from Vicky, and we've both learned a lot about lyrebirds together. So please welcome Vicky. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for having me here again. So I was actually here quite a few years ago now. I think it's been about 3 years since I've been down. But at the very start of my PhD, I gave a talk about the secrets of female lyrebirds. And it was at that point, I obviously didn't know very much, and it was more kind of a summary of what I hoped to find. I'm pleased to report that I finally finished my PhD. I submitted in December, so just waiting now. Hopefully I get some good news back about it. But regardless, I found out some really interesting things about these beautiful birds along the way. So tonight, we're talking about the secrets of female superb lyrebirds. So I just want to reiterate, this is all about females. Don't get me wrong, Alex. The superb lyrebird males are beautiful. They have a beautiful flashy tail. They do lovely song and dance. Don't get me wrong, I think they're nice. But female lyrebirds is where it's at. And I really hope that I can convince you that of that by the end of tonight, or at least you'll have a new appreciation of these wonderful birds. They may not have the tail, but they've certainly got the voice. Before I get started as well, I just want to give a big shout out to the Sherbrooke Lyrebird Survey Group. Without this group, I could not have completed my PhD. At least half of the work of my PhD was based down here in Sherbrooke. Now, their ongoing work with these lyrebirds has been an invaluable contribution to science for more than 60 years. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because citizen science is real science, and without their work, we wouldn't have the information that I have tonight. So a big thank you to them. Thank you. So it's going to be quite a few slides actually before we get to female lyrebirds. And the reason for that is I think we really need to start at the very beginning to get a holistic understanding of why lyrebirds are so important and why female lyrebirds are particularly special. And so to start at the very beginning, we really need to start with Charles Darwin. So I'm sure many of you are aware of Charles Darwin. He came up with this idea of sexual selection. So he had a look in the wild and he saw all these beautiful ornaments on animals, beautiful colors, big manes on lions and really long tails and birds. And he proposed that the reason that these beautiful ornaments exist is because males are trying to attract female mates. And in turn, females will only mate with males with these beautiful ornaments because it's a sign of their quality. And I mean, that makes sense if you think about it, because if you're able to put in a lot of energy into producing an ornament that really isn't helping you in any way, in fact, it probably makes you more susceptible to being eaten by something, then you must actually have high quality genes in some capacity. And so this idea of sexual selection acting on males can also be seen in birdsong. In fact, birdsong has been seen to be the most perfect example of a sexually selected trait in males. So the idea is that males sing to attract mates, and in turn, females select for this song because the more complex and beautiful a male's song is, the better quality that he is. Now, by contrast, song in female birds was thought to be rare and functionless. And not that it didn't occur, but when it did occur, it was simply passed off as a byproduct of sexual selection and thought to be basically functionless and not useful in any way. The funny thing about this assumption was that it was actually an assumption. So despite the fact that we're scientists, no one actually sat down to look to see if female birds sing. And it wasn't until 2014 that a team of scientists sat down and actually looked at the presence of song in female songbirds. And what they found is, lo and behold, female song is actually widespread and it's ancestral. So what that means is that the very first female bird possessed song. So female song isn't a new thing. It's been around since the very beginning. And the reason this is such a huge finding is because it challenges this idea of sexual selection acting on males. We only have 50% of the story. And that's because female birds, generally, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally female birds do not sing to attract mates. So they're not singing to attract mates. Well, then how did song evolve in females and what are they using it for? And so this finding raised some huge questions in the world of science. And those questions were, what are the sex-specific pressures that give rise to song in female birds? And what are the functions of vocalizations in females? And it's been my belief that
don't touch the touchpad.
Okay. We're there. Okay. It's my belief, just to keep you suspense, that studying female birds in female-specific behaviours and activities is really important for our understanding of how female vocalizations evolved. Now, another important part of birdsong is this idea of vocal mimicry. So vocal mimicry refers to the ability of songbirds to hear a sound or another song and then replicate it. And despite what you may think, it's actually relatively common. So nearly 50% of all songbirds are able to produce vocal mimicry in some capacity. So it's very, very widespread. But just as with song generally, they have had a male bias perspective on this as well. So generally for a long time, it was assumed that vocal mimicry was used by males to expand their song repertoires and make them more attractive to females. But because vocal mimicry is so unique and so interesting, there are a bunch of functional hypotheses that have been proposed that may explain why vocal mimicry evolved and how it is used by birds. So for example, if you're a burrowing owl chick, you use mimicry of rattlesnakes to hopefully deter predators that may be trying to eat you. Or if you're this fork-tailed drongo, you might use the sound of alarm calls of birds in the area to scatter mammals on the ground so that you can dive in and steal their food. It's called kleptoparasitism. Or you may actually be trying to recruit onlookers. So if you think of a noisy miner and their mobbing calls, maybe if you replicate that call, you might get a whole group of noisy miners in to chase away the predator that's trying to eat you. Now, these functional hypotheses, there is some support for them, which is really, really exciting, this idea of birds being able to use vocalizations functionally. But again, even in this realm, even where we know that these functions exist, the literature has either been heavily biased towards males or the sex of the singer hasn't been identified. And that's really problematic because males and females are fundamentally different and they may be using their vocalizations differently from one another. Now, in the case of female birds, there's actually a very tiny handful of studies that have actually looked at mimicry in females specifically. But where it has been looked at, we've seen some really interesting trends that really raise questions about how important mimicry is to females. So here we have a common cuckoo, who is a bird that lays her eggs in the nests of other birds. And what she does to be able to do that is, as she approaches the nest, she'll mimic the sound of a hawk, and the owners of that nest tend to scatter because they're scared that they're going to be eaten. And she takes opportunity of that moment of absence to lay her egg in the nest. So a beautiful example of a female bird using mimicry so that her offspring can survive. Then we also have a female great tit. And these birds mimic the sound of a snake hissing. And it's been found that females that use this mimicry have greater nesting success, they produce more offspring, and they're more able to deter predators than females that don't use it. And so even though these two birds are very, very different, the common theme is both females, both using mimicry in a context that is going to help their offspring survive. And so I've been looking to study these questions around female song and vocal mimicry using the superb lyrebird. And there's a few reasons for this. So for those of you who don't know, superb lyrebirds have a lek-like mating system. So they're not monogamous. Males sing from these beautiful mounds. They do song and dance displays to attract females. And females will mate and then go off and look after the chick all by themselves. These beautiful birds are found all up the east coast of Australia, and there is an introduced population down in Tasmania. Now, I've had two study sites. One of them is the beautiful Blue Mountains, which I call home. Very rugged terrain, lots of different habitat types, very, very different from down here in Sherbrooke, which was my second study site. And just to emphasize, the reason it's important to study these birds in multiple habitats is that we cannot assume that behaviours in one location are the same as they are in another. So in the case of Sherbrooke, for example, females like to nest along creek lines. In the Blue Mountains, you'd be lucky to find a nest along a creek line. They tend to be found on boulders. And so just these differences in habitat can result in differences in behaviour, and that can lead to assumptions about these birds that may impact our understanding and potentially even conservation issues in the future. So finally getting to the females. When it comes to female lyrebirds, again, there was no exception for them in being recognised for their vocalizations. So while I'm certain that there are many people in Sherbrooke who could attest to the fact that female lyrebirds have used mimicry and vocalizations, and they've known about it for a long time, in the world of science, it wasn't actually recognised until 2016 when it was formally documented in a scientific paper. And so DL and Welberg noted that female lyrebirds use alarm calls, their own female-specific song called a whistle song, and just like males, they are spectacular mimics. So to be fair, part of the reason female lyrebirds may have been overlooked for these spectacular abilities is that young male lyrebirds look the same as females. They share the same tail. And so whenever a bird was seen to be mimicking, because of this male bias perspective that we have, it was assumed that it was a male that was singing. But of course, now that we know that's not the case, we've had to kind of rethink everything. And of course, we can see that they can mimic, but why? Why are female lyrebirds using these incredible sounds and songs? And that has formed the basis of my PhD. But apart from these beautiful vocalizations, there's another reason that female lyrebirds are particularly wonderful for the study of song in general. And that is because they're extremely independent. So once they mate with a male, they look after the chick all by themselves, they build nests by themselves, they defend the territory all by themselves. And so it's a really unique opportunity to observe female-specific behaviours. In addition, They invest a lot of energy into their offspring and they have a very slow life history. So what I mean by that is that it takes a really, really long time for their offspring to reach maturity. So from egg to chick to fledgling is well over 3 months. And so we're afforded a really unique opportunity to observe female-specific vocalizations in the context of female-specific behaviours over a very long period of time. Another important thing to know about female lyrebirds to understand the pressures that they face is that they only lay 1 egg per breeding season. And the records, depending on the site, are a bit different. I think in Sherbrooke, there are records of females relaying after a predator has taken an egg. But generally speaking, they don't. And particularly in the Blue Mountains, we've never seen it happen. So essentially, once that chick is lost or the egg is lost, that's it for the breeding season. Now, the reason we've been able to kind of delve into the secrets of female lyrebirds is due to a recent kind of influx of new technologies that have allowed us to look at them uninvasively in the wild. So for all the locals down here in Sherbrooke, it's not uncommon for you to see lyrebirds or at least hear them. Whereas I've met a lot of people in the Blue Mountains, for example, who have heard them, but never seen a lyrebird in the wild. And they are, just because their behaviors are so elusive. And so because of these beautiful technologies, we've been able to get up close and understand them better. So I've used really tiny microphones in nests so we can hear communication between females and their offspring, long distance microphones so we can stand back and record. And of course, camera traps have been really valuable for observing these birds and seeing natural interactions that you wouldn't normally see if a human was present. So I can finally get to the secrets. So secret number 1 of female superb lyrebirds is that despite the fact that they look pretty, they are not nice. In fact, female lyrebirds are extremely competitive to the point that they will fight. So here we have a video of 2 females engaged in combat. And I need you to think about this from a female lyrebird's perspective. They feed by scratching in the ground with their legs. And in this video, they are locking talons and rolling around on the ground. Now, if you think about the danger they're putting themselves in by doing that, they could break a leg, they could injure themselves, render themselves unable to feed or unable to feed their offspring. To engage in this kind of behavior, there must be a huge amount of pressure on females due to the risk involved. The other thing about female lyrebirds is that they won't just fight with each other, but they will actually destroy each other's nests. So we captured this video here in Sherbrooke Forest. This female does not own this nest, and she took the opportune moment when the female was not around to destroy it. Now, this is, again, huge. This female isn't in her territory. You know, she's really risking herself by being there. But there must be some kind of benefit to her for doing this, right? And so this may not seem to be related to vocalizations, but it actually puts them into perspective. Because if you think about it, if you are in a really competitive environment and you risk injury to yourself and to your offspring, one of the best ways that you can avoid conflict is to use vocalizations, particularly song that carries a long way away. You can tell every other bird in the area what your territory is. That can help them avoid you. And it can also benefit your offspring by denoting the territory and maintaining that territory for them. And so these behaviors are really, really important for our overall understanding, but they really put the idea of song in context. And certainly we have some evidence of this as well in the wild. Here we have a video of 2 females interacting. I'll just let you watch for a moment. It's not a great video. What you can see is a fanned tail. And when the video goes on a bit longer, you can see snaking of the neck. Basically, females do these coordinated displays with each other on territorial boundaries, where they'll use song and they'll use mimicry. Now, I have to be honest, we don't know the true function of this as yet, but given the context of high competition between females, it's likely that these kind of displays are a way of resolving conflict without actually having to engage with one another. And if you think about it, if you're a female that is really good at mimicry and maybe you're a female that is not, perhaps females are able to judge each other off the vocalizations they use. Again, explaining how important vocalizations are to the ecology of females. So secret number 2. lyrebirds actually have it really, really tough when it comes to dealing with predators. So one aspect I haven't covered is that female lyrebirds actually have a really slow incubation period. And that is something that they seem to control themselves with their behavior. So female lyrebirds come off the nest at around 7:30 in the morning, and then they come back onto the nest at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when there's an egg in the nest. And during that time, the nest is left completely vulnerable to predators. And as you can see here, we have a pied currawong raiding the nest. This pied currawong got the nest of this female 3 consecutive years in a row. She was never successful in rearing any young. And what they'll do when we're dealing with really intelligent predators such as pied currawongs, they'll often just wait for the female to leave. They can wait as long as they like, and then they'll come in and steal the egg. So it's actually, sometimes I wonder, it's amazing that we have any lyrebirds at all when you're dealing with predators like this. Of course, it's different at every site. So rates of predation in Sherbrooke are actually quite low. But in the Blue Mountains, some sites we've lost 90% of the nests that we were following. And so it really is variable from site to site and from year to year. The other thing that we found out is that female lyrebirds are really having a tough time of it also with introduced predators. Particularly here in Sherbrooke, foxes are a problem. And the reason I think it's worthy of its own kind of comment is that it's one thing to see a nest taken by a native animal, but when you see it taken by an introduced species, you realize the kind of pressure that these animals are facing. Because, I mean, a lyrebird really stands no chance against a fox, whereas a currawong, you know, they can kind of fight if they need to. Secret number 3, though, is those videos I just showed you, the female was not at the nest. But what happens when a female is at the nest and a predator is around? So this video, some of you have seen before. I took this video at the very beginning of my PhD, just pure luck. I almost didn't check it because I thought that there was no egg in the nest. But what we actually found was an interaction between a goshawk and a female that had recently laid an egg. And I'm going to let it play. Hopefully you can hear the vocalizations that she produces, and I'll talk you through it at the end. Now, apart from being a really interesting interaction in and of itself, what was particularly interesting about this interaction is the vocalizations that the lyrebird used. So only 26% of the vocalizations produced during that video were lyrebird specific. So either alarm calls or female whistle song. The rest of it was mimicry. And so the reason this is interesting from an evolutionary perspective, from a functional perspective, is that theoretically, we would predict that lyrebird vocalization is the easiest vocalization for a female lyrebird to produce because some of them are innate, so they don't involve complex learning. In terms of whistle song, even though it is learned, there's plenty of opportunities to repetitively learn that whistle song. But mimicry, I mean, there's a lot of animals to learn your song from. So to be able to recall them and to consistently use them in a situation that is life or death is really, really fascinating. It suggests that this mimicry isn't just produced to be pretty or isn't just produced for the sake of it, but probably has an important function to these females. And so this interaction really spurred on one of the chapters of my PhD, where we attempted to answer questions such as, do females use mimicry in nest defense? And do females adjust the amount and type of mimicry that they use depending on the predator type that they're faced with? So to do this, what we did is we put tiny microphones in the nests of females, and we had cameras at nests, and we recorded natural interactions over the course of about 3 years between female lyrebirds and predators. We looked at the vocalizations that they used the morning before the interaction, during and after. And as you can see clearly here, before the morning before and before, really they're not using mimicry at all. But when there is an interaction with the predator or immediately after the interaction with the predator, vocal mimicry is used a lot. And so this kind of, again, supports what we saw initially in that video, that female lyrebirds are using mimicry almost exclusively in the context of predators at the nest. And this suggests that it is probably functional against predators in some way. But we wanted to look at it more thoroughly using experimental design and to be able to answer the question of whether females can adjust the amount and type of mimicry that they use depending on the predator they're faced with. And so to do that, we presented females with different taxidermy mounts at their nests of either a fox, a currawong, or a rosella. So the idea here was that we had different levels of threat. A fox was considered a high order threat because it's a threat to a female and her offspring. A currawong is only a threat to offspring and egg. And of course, a rosella is called a control. It's a neutral animal. And we then looked at the vocalizations that she produced. So just to show you what we did, because this was a lot of work over many field seasons and a lot of scrapes and scratches, but we set up these taxidermy mounts at nests. We exposed the female to them for 5 minutes and then took the mount away. And then we looked at the vocalization she produced during that time. And lo and behold, what we found was that female lyrebirds did use mimicry in the context of predators, and that they increased the mimicry that they use depending on the level of threat that they face. So they use more mimicry with the fox than they did the currawong or the rosella. Now I can see that people are going to say, what about the rosella? They're mimicking with the rosella. And it's true, it was a really surprising result. We really had to think about that for a while. Why would a female lyrebird mimic at a rosella? And we think, we're not 100% sure, but we think that the reality is that anything that is really close to the nest of a lyrebird is going to be a threat, because you're drawing attention to the location of that nest in one way or another. And it could be that you might not be a predator, but you may draw attention of a predator. And so females are using mimicry pretty much at anything, but they are using it more depending on the type of predator they're faced with. As for the currawong, why would you use less for the currawong? Well, part of the reason for that is that females didn't always vocalize when they saw a currawong. Sometimes they would just chase the currawong away. And so it's about kind of hedging your bets, weighing up the risk in that moment and using the best strategy in that moment to get rid of the animal that is trying to take your young. But just to show that females clearly did see these mounts as different, we have the response times of females to rosellas and currawongs and foxes. And with the rosella, sometimes they didn't respond at all. It took them on the whole time of the experiment to respond. But with the currawong and the fox, they pretty much responded immediately in increasing intensity. So then we wanted to see, well, are they using mimicry differently in terms of what they're producing? So they're using it more in the higher order predators, but are they using it differently between predators? And what we found is, yes, they are. So when confronted with a fox, a female was using mimicry more of non-predators than predators. But with the currawong, that switched and they were using more predators than non-predators. So I'm going to focus on those for the moment, and then I'll get to the rosella. Again, we're not entirely sure of why she's doing this, but one theory is that potentially because a fox is such a high order threat and doesn't actually have many natural predators itself, a female is using vocalizations that are most likely to attract attention and help recruit onlookers. So if you remember that recruitment hypothesis that I mentioned in the beginning, it's potential that females find that more effective in getting rid of foxes. As for currawongs, well, currawongs, they're pretty good nest predators, but they're no match for a goshawk, for example. And so a female might find this more effective when confronted with a currawong. As for the rosella, well, a rosella can easily, obviously should be scared of a predator. So it kind of makes sense actually that a female would use predator mimicry when confronted with a rosella. So as you can see, female lyrebirds not only use mimicry in the context of the nest, but they're able to identify predators and use mimicry differently depending on the predator type that they're faced with. So it really needs to kind of sink in, because what it suggests is that female lyrebirds not only have these beautiful vocalizations, but they have the intelligence and capacity to differentiate, and not only differentiate, but call upon vocalizations that they've learned that may be good in particular scenarios. So we call this behavioral plasticity, and this is the first evidence we've seen of it in female lyrebirds. Okay, so moving on to secret number 4. We also looked at female whistle song between males and females. And so again, we had to kind of get rid of this idea of assuming things, and we compared male and female whistle song and found that, yes, they are actually different. So for people down here in Sherbrooke, the females down here do sing. We do have some evidence of it. They don't sing quite like the birds in the Blue Mountains. And so this whistle song study was based off the females in the Blue Mountains, who really have these incredible interactions with each other. You hear them singing throughout the morning. And as you can see here, male whistle song is really long and quite dynamic, and with this beautiful long tail end, whereas female whistle song doesn't seem to have the same patterns to it. It's shorter, it's less predictable. And this is probably due to the different roles of males and females. Again, males are singing to attract mates. It makes sense that you're going to have a more stereotyped, repeatable song that females are interested in. Whereas females, if you're using your whistle song in territorial combat or to deter a neighbour or rival, perhaps you need something that changes or isn't quite as repeatable as a male lyrebird needs. But we also found that female lyrebirds and male lyrebirds actually incorporate mimicry into their whistle song, which is really an interesting thing to consider. So for male lyrebirds, it's probably something to do with males showing their performance ability. So maybe including a mimetic element in your whistle song and then having to go to your whistle note shows your ability at singing in a way that just repeating the same syllables over and over again doesn't. As for females, well, they're not trying to attract mates. It could be that females, again, are trying to signal to other females. And I think what will be really important in future studies is seeing what kind of mimicry females are using in these songs, and whether it's the same between territories or between sites, or whether that changes. I guess the main takeaway from this is that these signals are quite complex, and at face value, we can miss information if we don't dive in and actually look at the details of the songs that we hear from these birds. And this is just to show you where the mimicry placement is in this song for male and female lyrebirds. So for male lyrebirds, we find that the mimicry is kind of condensed more to the front end of the song, whereas for females, it's kind of a bit more all over the place, a bit more at the end than at the beginning. And again, this is probably because of the different pressures that males and females face. The fact that males are so stereotyped does suggest that there is some kind of performance component going on that females are selecting for in their song that the females obviously aren't exposed to. Secret number 5. So we had a good look at the mimicry of the birds in Sherbrooke Forest. For this particular study, we followed 16 females over multiple years, and we found that they mimicked 24 different vocalization types. They mimicked 18 different bird and mammal species, 3 different environmental and mechanical sounds. So they can do incredible sounds like branches creaking and wing beats and beat clacks. And when you hear them, it's very, very distinct and very, very accurate. And also, we found that they mimicked introduced species. So red fox and blackbird were the 2 most common introduced species. So this is really interesting in and of itself. It's really nice to know what your birds are mimicking down here. But it also has the potential for a more long-term study to see if females are shifting what they're mimicking over time. It can give you an idea of what's in the environment potentially, depending on who females are learning off. If they're learning from the environment around them, the fact that they're mimicking foxes, that's a bit of a concern. There's lots and lots of ways that this study can continue to go into the future using the banded birds that are down here in Sherbrooke. Again, a really valuable resource because we're able to follow individually marked females over a long period of time and follow their history. So the top models of the females down here were the Australian magpie, the brown goshawk, and the white-necked honeyeater. And the top 10, just so you can get a feel for it, included, believe it or not, wedge-tailed eagle. I don't know how common your sightings are down here, but the females certainly love to mimic them. Again, red fox, laughing kookaburra. What's beautiful about seeing this kind of written out here is it kind of gives you, one, the diversity of birds and mammals that these animals are mimicking, but also this might be different at another location. And that raises interesting questions as well. Why do females mimic what they mimic? What is it about these sounds that is appealing to them or benefits them in some way? And if two sites have similar species and they're mimicking different things, why is that the case? It's probably due to competition between females and particular site preferences. But again, there are clearly more secrets that we don't know that would be good for future research. Secret number 6. So I'm just going to play a sequence of mimicry for you, hopefully. Oh, there we go. So this is one of my favorite females in the Blue Mountains. She is an incredible mimic and can mimic just, I haven't counted the number of vocalizations that she can do, but it feels like every time I see her, she can come up with something different. She is incredible. But then we'll come across other females who just don't seem to make any sound at all. And I'm sure that people who've worked with lyrebirds in Sherwood Forest can say the same thing. There are some females that just blow your mind with how much they can produce, and then others that just are quiet. And so we're really actually very interested in this, trying to explain why females are so variable.
You touched the touchpad.
Given away. All right, why females are so variable in their ability to produce mimicry. And I mean, it seems so obvious to me that, clearly it's because female lyrebirds are long-lived and that older females surely should be able to produce better mimicry than younger females because they've been doing it longer, right? So if you continue to learn throughout your life, we would predict that older females will mimic better than younger females or more often than younger females. And this idea is actually called open-ended learning. This is actually a really key component to the understanding of birdsong learning in general. And in the case of vocal mimics, it has generally been assumed that vocal mimics are open-ended learners. So by that they continue to learn throughout their lifetime. And certainly there has been some evidence shown of that in male vocal mimics. Mockingbirds, for example, have been shown to increase the repertoires that they have throughout their life. And so it kind of stands to reason that perhaps in females that would be the same. So what we did using the Sherbrooke females is we looked at all the mimicry they produced, how much they produced, and looked at their age. And lo and behold, I was completely wrong. Female lyrebirds do not, basically age does not explain the variability in female lyrebirds and their ability to produce mimicry. So I have multiple graphs here, but basically what each of them shows is the same thing, a huge amount of variability in females in the production of mimicry. What I want you to pay attention to is number 4, which represents 4 years of age. It's the youngest female lyrebird in our study. And she produced some of the most diverse mimicry and some of the largest amounts of mimicry of any of our birds in our study. And we have a 20-year-old who really didn't produce much at all. And so this is actually quite interesting, even though it's not the result we predicted or expected, because it suggests that perhaps, contrary to the general assumption that has been going around, that maybe lyrebirds are actually what we call closed-end learners. And so what that means is that maybe lyrebirds are actually learning everything that they learn and are going to learn in a very short period of time early on in their development. So for lyrebirds, it's actually a really long period of time. It's still 4 years if you're a female, about 7 if you're a male. And it could be that they're actually learning everything at that point, and then as they go through their life, that's what they're reproducing, and they don't actually acquire too many more new vocalizations. Now, this is a very preliminary study. We need to look at more females in Sherbrooke and compare it over a longer period of time. But that also challenges our understanding of vocal learning in these birds, that actually birds that produce vocal mimicry may actually simply be recalling what they've learned early on in life and are not taking on new vocalizations as they go, which really challenges our understanding of vocal learning in these birds as well. But I really looked at this data every way that you could possibly look at it because I was just so shocked by the result in the beginning. This idea that these long-lived birds didn't change in any way with their vocalizations seemed really peculiar to me. But when we looked at it, there were some age-related effects, which were actually still quite interesting. So it seems that female lyrebirds in Sherbrooke will change what they mimic as they age. So older females tend to mimic more predators and younger females tend to mimic more non-predators. And we suspect that this is due to experience. Well, this is one potential explanation. That maybe as females get older, they're using mimicry that is actually most effective to them in nest defense, for example. So it could be that female lyrebirds in Sherbrooke Forest are experiencing predation events that are best prevented by using predator mimicry. That's one hypothesis that would be really, really cool if it's true. We haven't proven it yet. Alternatively, it could just be that the type of mimicry, the type of vocalization that they're producing is different as they get older as well. So we have more work to do here in this area, but it is an interesting concept, the idea that, again, this idea of intelligence in these birds, that they learn as they go and will reduce their vocalizations down to the most effective for them to survive. And then finally, we looked at the length of the vocalizations that females were producing. So the length of the elements of each mimetic vocalization. And we looked at that and compared it with age. And we also looked at it for the conspecific, so lyrebird specific vocalizations that they use. And we found opposite trends. So as females age, the mimetic vocalizations that they use seem to get longer. But by contrast, the conspecific vocalizations that they use get shorter. And so, look, this is really interesting. It could be that female lyrebirds actually are producing more accurate mimicry as they get older. So if you think about it, for a sound to be accurate, it needs to be a complete length, right? You can't chop off a little bit at the beginning or chop off a little bit at the end and have it be completely accurate. So if the sound is increasing in length, it could be that females are actually getting better with age. So while they might not be learning new vocalizations, they're perfecting the vocalizations that they have. And there is evidence in males of this, where males will perfect mimicry as they get older. As for the conspecific vocalizations, this could again be females working out what is best for them and most useful for them. Perhaps they're using shorter alarm calls. Maybe these big long scream calls that they use aren't as effective as shorter ones at getting rid of predators around the nest. So as you can see, we actually have probably more questions now than we have answered from this study. What we will continue to do is to continue to use the female sound in Sherbrooke, again, to expand our numbers, because we need as many numbers of females as possible to be able to make sure that these results stand up. And I think we'll have to do a few more experiments in the field as well, because at the moment we have one side of the story. We have how females, for example, are using mimicry in response to predators. But is it actually effective against predators? So the next step would be to test predators using female vocalizations, their mimicry, and see how they respond to females, and whether it is actually effective in deterring them in the context of the nest. And so that's it from me for tonight. So thank you all. And I just wanted to obviously shout out to every single person that has supported this and all of you for being here. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicky. That was fabulous. I'm sure there were a lot of graphs there that I hadn't seen yet, so that was really exciting. Look, it's been really special to come along this journey with you, and I've certainly taken a lot out of it, and I'm sure everyone here has too. So thank you very much. We might take some questions. I've not been as technologically advanced as I thought I was. And I can't take the questions on the Zoom through text. So if we're going to have Zoom questions, I might give people on Zoom a chance to just speak up, so unmute themselves, which we said we wouldn't do, but I don't have a choice, I'm afraid. So if anyone on Zoom has a question, if you can unmute yourself and speak up, go ahead. Can't see anyone at this stage unmuted, so.
Alex, at what age can you sex a lyrebird, please?
That's a good question. Usually they start sprouting the tail feathers at about 3 to 4 years if they're a male, so they'll get the filamented feathers. For a female, when they start breeding, I don't think there's any.
There's no other, not visually, there's no other way. Obviously, we look at their behaviour, so they might start just doing the half nests, basically the cradles, and not actually completing nests. It's probably the best giveaway. We have been taking blood from these birds, and you can sex them, obviously, using the blood as well. So we're hoping to be able to sex them earlier and earlier one day. But otherwise, it's just wait and see. And we can still get it wrong. Yeah.
Any other questions on Zoom?
Yeah, I had one. I'm just wondering, how many larynxes do lyrebirds have?
It's simpler than most birds, isn't it?
Yeah, It's but most birds have the dual larynx, which means that they can produce multiple sounds at once, which is why you can hear a flock of birds in mimicry, which is one of my favorite kinds of mimicry actually. When you hear the feathers flapping and there's multiple birds at once, it's because they can do different sounds at the same time.
And in a bird, it's called a syrinx instead of a larynx.
Syrinx. Oh, thank you.
No worries. And McGregor's have a question.
Yes, Alex. My question was, why would lyrebirds mimic magpies, which are more grassland birds than wet forest birds?
Good question. So I was completely surprised by that result, if I'm honest. Yeah, fascinating. Look, it's got to do, I think, with the birds that are in this area and the fragmentation of the forests. It really is surrounded by urban, land, lots of development. You're seeing birds here that you probably wouldn't have seen, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So it is a surprise. Birds in the Blue Mountains do encounter magpies, and we do get magpie mimicry there, but certainly not on the level that we're seeing here in Sherbrooke. It could be that there's something that in the vocalizations that they're mimicking from the magpies that may be particularly appealing to females in Sherbrooke. And because of the extreme competition down here, so you have a higher density of birds in a relatively small area, the competition is high, driving the selection of these vocalizations in a way that it may not at other sites, such as in the Blue Mountains. And so other than these ideas of fragmented forests and those birds being in the forest in a way that they're not in other areas, there could be something about these calls that these females find particularly useful when they're engaging in these territorial interactions. This is all guesswork. We don't actually know.
So Karen, do you have a question too?
Yes. Why the fact that they can they're mimicking foxes is really interesting. And I wondered if the female uses that mimicry to scare away predators.
Yeah, so they definitely are using that mimicry, and there are some females here that almost exclusively, we have some incredible recordings of females repeatedly using fox mimicry, which makes me wonder that they are trying to use that to scare away predators. it's something that, again, we would need to test because it could go either way. So would a naive animal that has never encountered a fox respond to fox calls? Maybe not. But maybe a bird in the forest here that encounters foxes regularly knows what that means, or any animal really that's a predator going for a lyrebird nest. So it seems that that could be the case, but again, I think the best way would be to, again, we'd have to test it, which will be a little way off. I think that's
Test it on a currawong.
A currawong,
fox call
yeah,
to a
exactly,
currawong.
and see how they respond. Yeah.
All right, we might just give the Zoomers one more chance for a question. If there's one more question on Zoom.
Yeah, I've got one, thanks.
All right.
I noticed when the goshawk was at the nest, every time the female changed her song, the goshawk looked away from the nest. Do you think the more elements of mimicry you've got, the more chance you've got of creating a diversion or something like that?
Yeah, that's you picked up on something really good there. So another hypothesis is that you kind of throw everything you have at the bird, and so it could be that by throwing everything, that you're confusing them and overwhelming their senses essentially. So this bird has to look around because is there another goshawk or is there a channel-billed cuckoo? It must be very, very confusing. And so that in itself, rather than just knowing what vocalizations to use, it could just be you use all of your repertoire and you hope that that works. It's definitely something interesting to consider for sure.
Alex, I've got another question, Alex.
All right.
Which is about learning from parent to offspring. That's common with many birds. So is some of the aspects of this repertoire, including say foxes and other raptors, is there any evidence about learning with the young birds?
We don't know, and we're hoping to find out, which is part of the reason we had a dual purpose of putting nests, microphones in nests, so that we could also get interactions between females and their young. And we were hoping to see some evidence of birds starting to learn in the nest and from their mothers around the nest in the vocalizations that they use. Ideally, what we would do is we would look at the songs of females and their offspring over a long period of time and compare mothers and daughters. Would be a beautiful study to see if females, are learning, teaching their daughters. Another way to look at it would be to look at compare mimicry to birds in the area as well, and to see whether females are learning from each other or whether they're learning from birds in the environment. These are actually parts of the study that we're hoping to be able to look at in the future. We're starting to get the data in for it. I'm hoping in a couple of years we'll have some answers for you. But at the moment, it really could go either way. It could be that in the 4 years that females take to mature, they are learning from their mothers. It's certainly a possibility, given that the young of females hang around with their mother up to a full year. That's a long period of time in which to be learning, but there's so many other pressures that could be influencing that as well. We just don't know.
We might take some questions from the room now. Thank you, Zoomers. Any questions in the room for Vicky?
So for females, 4 years is when they begin. Whether they're successful or not at 4 years is another thing. I think the youngest bird that's been successful in Sherbrooke is 4, but it's unusual. We don't see a lot of it.
Does that correlate with the graph that you had earlier where the 4-year-old bird had some of the highest?
Yeah, so I feel like the good thing about being a young bird is you're just going to try everything, aren't you? You're going to use your repertoire when you're there. Like, why you've got nothing to lose? And so this idea of being inexperienced would be a good perfect scenario for you to use that mimicry. As for when they stop, look, they seem to keep producing eggs, whether they hatch or not is another thing. So the oldest known bird on record, thanks to our records in Sherbrooke, is 27 years. And we certainly have females in their 20s producing eggs, but the viability of them could be hit and miss. We're not sure. It seems that there may be an aging process going on there.
Yeah.
Is that the same as for males?
The males, so We actually don't know.
I'm
Vicky
thinking, like,
doesn't.
if they are open learners and they're like learning more and more as they get older,
Yeah.
that's not a great cue for like who's the fittest male to reproduce with, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. We don't
We
know
would
in
have
males.
absolutely
We have
no data on it.
none at
Yeah.
all. Like,
But
it's
I have
just-
another question as well.
yeah, go for it.
Do you think that the shape of the nest has something to do with limiting sight
Or
for vocal mimicry? Because like that lady was just asking about the hawk turning, having to turn around and try to see what was going on behind it.
yeah, absolutely. I think that there's something to that. I think that the shape of the nest for these birds is really important for a couple of reasons. One, it's really thickly lined, and so because they cool the egg, so they're deliberately cooling the egg to make it take longer. Why they're doing that is a whole other presentation, we think. But they're taking their time to let these eggs incubate. To do that, they need to have a really thick nest that keeps them warm. So that's one aspect. But also, these nests are huge, but really well camouflaged, right? And so you don't want a huge opening, because any movement is going to make you more obvious to a predator. So there could certainly be something there for sure.
And then on top of that, why would a lyrebird egg be coloured to blend in when it's a dark
Yeah, it doesn't.
domed nest?
Yeah.
They're all different, beautiful patterns.
Yeah, they're all very, very good. Yeah.
And very well camouflaged.
Someone else should do a PhD. Yeah. Sorry.
Question over the back.
Right. Yeah, I was taken by the open distracted. Because she's so clever and distracted.
Yeah.
So it seemed to be a really question. One stupid question what's their sort of scatter rate? What's their square meters, or is there a certain ratio?
Not a stupid question at all. It's a really, really good question. It's really, really variable. So down here in Sherbrooke, you could find a nest, I mean, you tell me what, every 200 to 300 meters, maybe?
Yeah, might be a bird per 3 or 4 hectares.
Yeah, so
That's everyone, not just females.
yeah. So they're kind of right on top of each other. In the Blue Mountains, it's very site dependent. There are some sites where I swear you could have 2 females in a whole gully, you know, really, really spread out. But some of my sites, you know, the females are back to back, and we see those beautiful territorial displays. So I think that where there is high competition for good resources, that's where you see kind of smaller and smaller territories, because all the females want to go to that area to reproduce.
I was just going to ask you, talking about how the females are quite independent when they're nesting.
Yes.
Do they, when they're not nesting, do they hang out together, or do they fight? Like that video we saw
So,
earlier.
yeah, honestly, we don't know enough about them in the non-breeding season. Generally speaking, they don't hang out together. You will see females with their young. So there's the youngs with them for a whole year, and then they start nesting again and they kick out that whole young. So if you see like a pair of lyrebirds, generally it's the female and her offspring. That's for females. They don't really have any reason to be in a group. Males, however, I don't know, there is evidence, particularly as you come closer to the breeding season, that young males will kind of hang out together. And it's I don't think it's anything social, but they are kind of learning from each other. So you'll see young males perform on mounds or copy each other. In the mountains, there's one site where we often see 4 or 5 young males together. And I think it's less of a social thing and more about competition and learning in that instance. But really hard to follow them in the non-breeding season.
And just one other question.
Yeah.
It's only the females that do the alarm calls, isn't it?
The alarm. No, males do alarm calls as well. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And they're, for all intents and purposes in the field, if you hear a scream alarm call, it could be male or female.
I've heard a few names.
Yeah. I bet.
Well, we're just past the hour, so on that, I think we might. Oh, you want one more question before we? All right,
Yeah.
one more official on the record question. Make it count.
You didn't mention cats at all. They come into your observations of the sound.
Yeah, absolutely. Cats. So in this study, that portion of the study, we didn't get any cats. Alex has cats on camera in this area taking chicks. In the Blue Mountains, I have had a chick get to fledging. It was literally that morning, was using the calls that they used just before they fledge. And the last video is of a cat coming and taking the bird. And there are females in the Blue Mountains definitely that will meow at you. And these are animals that are in the middle of nowhere too, like we're talking national park. I've heard, you know, a lot of people said that feral cats don't meow. And that may be true. I'm not a feral cat expert, but these birds are definitely mimicking cats. And, you know, I want to emphasize that cats can roam a long way. And when you're on the border of a national park, you know, a gully may be a long way, but it's easy for a cat, even domestic cat, to get down. So the first time that I had a female lyrebird meow at me, it was concerning. And unfortunately, I think their cats are a big problem.
Good question.
Yeah.
We might draw it to an official close, but unfortunately we can't offer you tea and coffee because of the current council rules still hang over from COVID. So sorry about that, but thanks very much everyone for coming. Thank you to you guys on Zoom for zooming in. I hope you could hear all the sounds properly. It's been a great night and we hope to have plenty more down the track. So thanks very much.